Hi, Dr. Nicole. Welcome to the Work Podcast.
Thanks for
Hi.
having me.
I'm fangirling because I'm looking for our TikTok. I'm like, your content is like, I trust the algorithm because it was like, I found one of your videos about how everything's turning beige in our society, and your stitch to that was how creativity is a form of resistance. And then I just like watched all of your content. I was like, this is so interesting. It's like I feel like I went to like a university for free just by watching your content. We definitely want to support you and your work. So let's get started. We want to learn a little bit more about you and your origin story, and you can take this as far back as you want, but just to get to know you.
Yeah. So first, thank you. Thank you for having me. And also that's a great compliment because that's literally what I want to do is I want my content to feel as if somebody's getting like an education, but for free or being able to contribute back. Right. So, and it kind of goes back to who I am. So I'm originally from Chicago on the far south side suburbs. And went to Catholic school my whole life. So it's like a tale as old as time if you're from the city on the south side. But because of that, going to Catholic school from first to 12th grade, I had a big foundation in, of course, Christianity, but there was a way that I was also interested really in origin stories. And so that got me into archaeology as an idea. And that going to school for anthropology. But because I couldn't afford field school, I didn't actually become an archaeologist. I ended up doing biological and forensic anthropology because all you need is a collection, some bones somewhere, and there was plenty of them in different locations. So long story short, I finished my PhD though in sociocultural. So I actually spanned the whole range of the discipline. I went from wanting to do archaeology to doing biological forensics, looking at skeletal analysis, and then going into sociocultural, political, legal aspects of it. So there was a kind of a long, long road of that. And from that, how do I say, there is a way that when going to school and having to be in those institutional spaces, I had to start to also reassess who I was. And that's how I started to, over the years, realize that the work I was doing, how I understood the work I was doing, how I even engaged the literature and the theories was always going to be in contention with the university. So when I was going and doing my PhD, I decided to, again, move from biological to sociocultural, but my advisor was medical. She did a lot of medical stuff. So I actually did my first 2 years looking at genetics research, looking at genes, looking at ideas of biological race. That shit got boring real quick. I'm not going to lie. It really did, because it wasn't, the theory wasn't there. It was still newer at the time because the genome had just been, and people forget the genome being actually understood is pretty recent in time, right? So all of these things were interplaying with what were the questions being asked in essentially the mid 2000s, early 2010s, with a lot of research around race. The questions I was asking always got pushed back. Like every question I asked got pushed back. From my master's, when I was just looking at non-metric racing of the skull, I was told my questions were dangerous. And I thought that was really interesting because I didn't understand it. I really didn't understand what I was being told, right? And I'm being told by some of the biggest names in the field at the time, who are mostly old white men in the forensics world, that the questions I was asking, I need to be careful of. And one said dangerous. And so I was just asking, is race real? It wasn't like I was asking something real. I'm like, is this shit real? Doesn't make any sense because you got, the mixed race category coming in. So I was trying to play with this idea of what does it mean to be raised through the bones? Because you can't really do it, but you can because we're taught to see difference through race. So this is the conundrum of living in these kind of places, right? We only understand ourselves via the categories given to us, but the categories given to us are meant for our suppression. So we're always in this kind of loop, right? Always in this loop of figuring out who the hell we are. So this is a long story. I'm gonna wrap it up. But so when I jumped into my dissertation work, this is where abolitionism started to come knocking to me, because I was in the UK looking at the relationship between race and nation via organization. So Black, Asian, minority ethnic. I was in Bristol, England for 2 years. And I remember presenting my research at one of the universities out of London. I got invited to come with a bunch of other British grad students to present research and be on this like old manor for 2 days. It was the most British fucking thing you can ever think of. It's like the country manor outside the city. Like there's carpet in the bathroom. Like the shit's gross, right? But it's also like it is very British. So I'm there, right? I'm there and presenting my research. And basically, I was talking about the relationship between race and citizenship and how in racialized nations, citizenship is always going to be unequal. And I was literally told to my face that I was an American bringing American race ideas to the UK. Race was not a big issue in the UK. And that if I presented my research at some place like Goldsmiths or London School of Economics, I would be laughed at. And I was given this as actually constructive criticism, right? This is out of supposed love. Well, look where we are now. Fucking Brexit's that I predicted 10 years ago, right? So it's I wrote about it 10 years ago, right? You could see it coming when you look at Loop. So this really began, that's basically who I am. I didn't realize it, but I'm a disruptor, but I only disrupt because I'm asking questions. I'm not trying to disrupt. I'm just trying to understand what is the actual foundations of where I am and how do we get here? And if it's not working, why the hell are we still doing it, right? It's really the basis of all of my work. If it's not working, why are we doing it? So then when I finished my dissertation, I essentially decided not to do a tenure track job because I was like, it's not good. Why? Why? It felt like a kind of this nonstop ability to just be in the cog of the machine. So I said, okay, what else could I do? And so I decided to work more with students and took jobs in the university that were working with students at the margins. This is where I started to understand praxis. So understanding what it means to put theory into practice by working with students who were living the same things we were researching. And then I had to realize, well, I'm also living the shit that I'm researching. If I'm talking about institutions being racist and we are cogs of the machine, then who the hell am I? If I'm in the university and I'm doing this work, right? So the last 10 years, as I was teaching in higher ed, I was at a small liberal arts school, I was at a couple of Ivies. I realized that the more you stay in these spaces and try to fight back within, the more they actually need you in those spaces to resist so they understand where their holes are so they can plug them. And then once they've used that work you've done, you're disposable, right? So so-called reactionaries are needed in spaces because the revolutionaries or the reactionaries are those who protest let the space know what it's missing so that it can essentially do the band-aid and then make the presentation that what they've done is actually aligned with the majority good, right? When I did all of that, and I realized that while I was doing all this work, other people were getting the rewards from it, getting tenure, getting grants, getting promotions, and I was just getting sick. I was getting fat. I was literally feeling as if there was no joy in life, I'll be honest. There was absolutely no joy in life. And then I hit 36, 37, and moved to Brown, was in Rhode Island. And it was the first time I started to realize that no matter where you move, the shit's still the same. No matter where you are, you can't move away until you actually face yourself. And that's when I started my practice. I met my godfather then and started the practice of Lukumi Ocha, which essentially was the beginning of me realizing that if I wanted to do the work I wanted to do, I couldn't do it in spaces that were also trying to kill me. So that's when abolitionism really started to come to the forefront. And then the pandemic hit. My life blew up. And a lot of revelations hit, though, like the fact that I wasn't straight, like that I was in a marriage to a man, like that I was in institutions that I didn't really want to be in, like that the colleagues I had weren't friends, they were colleagues, like the fact that trauma bonding is not friendship, it's just trauma bonding. And when you don't want to sit in trauma no more, there's no fucking friendship, right? All those things that are happening right at the same time. And that's what essentially led me to say, well, then fuck it. Why don't I just teach in the public and see what happens? And that's how the TikTok was born. So it's a very long, but yeah, so that's essentially part of me in a nutshell.
There's so much richness in what you said and in your story. Um, y- you know, the first thing that, or one of the things that came to my mind was the way that you said that in the UK they didn't necessarily see their racialized problems, and they thought that racialized issues exist primarily in America. But when you hear people of color who have come from the UK express, they have an entirely different story, and it's fascinating the ways that people can I don't know if they still use this phrase, but like ostrich yourself, like put your head in the ground and pretend like nothing,
Yeah.
around you is actually happening, and how they've been able to, they being white body people who are and dominant culture in general, but the way that they can ignore what is, and they can ignore other people's experiences. There isn't a question there. That's just a statement. I'm just,
But I
yeah.
think it's important though, right? Because this is being looking and examining race and racism in the UK helped me understand and see America's racism better,
Say why.
right? So studying race and racism in the UK helped me understand the US's racism better. I could actually see it better. So being in the UK, right, there's a way that the US becomes this really interesting space in the world. We have put ourselves out there so much as the bastions of democracy, but because we're also so loud in everything we do, including our racism, we also got signaled to the world that, hey, at least we ain't as bad as the Americans, right? We don't treat
Mm-hmm.
our black and brown indigenous that bad, even though they do. But there was a
Mm-hmm.
way that in the imagination, because America made itself so great in the world post 1950s, all of that translates into other countries being able to scapegoat. This is why I don't believe in allyship. I just did a TikTok on this. I do not believe in allyship. Either you are in the fight with me at the front lines, either you're an abolition or you're not, because allyship means that you think you don't have a fight in this game, that somehow the oppressive system won't come for your ass either. It's coming for all of us. It doesn't like any of us. We are nothing more than a worker in the cog, unless you occupy a position of power. And power is very limited, and power is through an oppressive means. So if you're trying to be an ally in a fight with me against oppression, baby, they don't like your ass either. You're not allying anything. You better be on the front line too. And if you're on the front line as a white, able-bodied person, the ability of the state to enact violence on you is a hell of a lot less, because you become the embodiment of that state. And if you put your body on that line, there's a way the state will back up. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what people have to understand. This is what a lot of old school revolutionaries are trying to tell us is like with Fred, we love to talk about Fred Hampton all the time. We forget that he was killed at like 21 by the state. But what he was talking about was, what does it mean to have a coalition in which people understand their space within the larger fight? Because it's not the same, but we all have the same fight, right? We all
Mm-hmm.
have the same struggle. This is what Angela Davis meant when she said, freedom's a constant struggle. It is a constant struggle. But how you're struggling in that fight will be different depending upon how you are perceived by that state. So
Mm-hmm.
allyship does not actually move the needle. It actually allows the needle to maintain itself, but it makes whiteness, therefore white folks, feel good because they can say, I've got a Black Lives Matter sign outside. I've got a we believe in all this shit here. And we put an LGBTQIA flag up, and I've done my job and throw some money at an organization. But you have no idea the foundations of the oppression. You've not examined how you're a part of that. You're not examining how it shows up in your own home, at your own kitchen table. So what's actually being done, right?
Yeah.
And that's another reason why abolition appealed to me more than like just straight DEI work or allyship.
Yeah.
I
I
feel like the Kanye debacle is an example of that. It comes for everyone, that
Yes.
no one's safe, you
Yep.
know?
I was just gonna say that, white women have, white feminism is the biggest perpetrator of white supremacy and patriarchy, and I think they are starting to wake up because of their bodily autonomy being at risk with the abortion ban, and then all the anti-Semitism that is being perpetuated by somebody, a rapper. I don't want to say his name, but I think it starts to become apparent when it starts affecting them,
Yes.
which it
Yes.
is.
And that's what happens when you align yourself with whiteness generationally. So this is where I sometimes, well, not sometimes, it makes my ass ache. I'm not going to lie. When people want to continuously talk about, right, that was in the past, I'm not my ancestors. But at the same time, you sitting in a house that your grandmama had. So therefore you are your ancestor because the asset you have is based upon that ancestor, right? So there's a way that when I will say this, when white folks don't want to understand how their ancestral attachments to whiteness have impacted them to the present day and why they feel lost, why they feel they have no culture, why they feel they have to appropriate other things, why they feel they have to go to other practices, you're doing that because of the ancestral choices your people made. So you have to be able to go back and ask yourself what made them attach themselves to a concept that fed them a bunch of lies, told them if they gave up who they were and where they came from to be subsumed under this construct called whiteness by the category of white, that then told you a bunch of lies and said you were special, even though nothing about you actually is special because it was a part of an assimilation tactic, right? But it told you you're special, it told you you're an individual, so that when you are challenged, right, because you don't understand what a challenge is, because the whole damn system is made to make you comfortable, because you got to be comfortable to be buying into the lies that whiteness told your ancestors, therefore are telling you through the line, right? When you sit in all of that, and then you have something coming out of the woodwork that people have been talking about, Black women have been talking about this, organizers are talking about what Roe v. Wade was going to be turning back for years, right? We talked about this. When it actually comes at your front door, because you are used to being lied to, when you're told the truth, you don't know what to do with it. Right? So until it hits white womanhood directly, they will ignore it. But then also they don't understand that white femininity is needed in order to maintain exactly what you said, Laura, white patriarchy, right? So this is an historical thing at the table. I have sat at tables and seen how white men are given space just to take up space with no ability, no background, don't know what the hell they're actually saying. But that space is set up for their comfort. And that comfort comes out of white femininity, because white femininity has been trained for generations, for centuries, to only understand itself in relationship to white patriarchy. They have to start to see themselves separate, because right now white feminism is training and literally birthing from the womb white patriarchy. And guess what patriarchy just did? It said, get your ass in the bedroom and make some babies.
Oh my God.
Right? So it's also a liar. They have to believe the fact that it will never see them. And that's what's hard to actually understand, is that no matter what side you try to come in on, right? No matter what angle you try to come in with whiteness, it does nothing but consume. It will take anything and anybody, it will use you, and then it will spit you out until the next person comes in.
I feel like Resmaa Menakem really touches on the consumptive aspect of whiteness and how it teaches us to, and we've sort of been talking about this intermittently throughout the week, but how it teaches us to consume other cultures and then spit them out as something that whiteness invented, right?
Yes.
So we see that across, all aspects of appropriation, and I think that it's fascinating because we find ourselves in a place of overconsumption to the detriment of our planet, to our future. Yeah. And the response to that is to consume more.
You do have a TikTok video dedicated to abolition versus allyship. And people can go watch that. But what is, like, because your whole thing is you work on the praxis of theory and action. So how can people start becoming abolitionists and not allies?
I think there's a couple of different ways, right? I heavily believe there's different ways to do it. How I enter into it is through the learning and through the history. I follow along the likes of people like Walter Rodney, in which I believe in deep self-study and in deep group study, because there's a way that you don't, let me say it this way. Let's use an example. Let's look at 2020, right? So 2020, we had the pandemic, of course, and lockdowns, but we also had George Floyd. right? And George Floyd opened up the kind of Pandora's box around state violence and anti-Blackness in the state globally. So all these protests and stuff, right? But because it was so-called new or so-called for the first time truly in the face of white people, right? Whiteness, and then a lockdown. So now that was the one thing they could do. All that energy was directed at trying to fix it, but they had no idea what they were fixing. Right. So you want to go in and you want to protest and you're saying, yes, he was killed by the state. But then what does that really mean? Because it's not a one-off thing. It's an embedded structural practice that has always been here because the police are nothing more than the new embodiment of the slave catcher. Because the whole system is nothing more than a new embodiment of the plantation system. But unless you know that, unless you, not even having to go so deep, but understanding how these things connect, right? And you try to just go straight to action, nothing actually ever happens. So for me, the ability to be in community of study community is vitally important because that's exactly what they did in the 50s and 60s. People were on the ground engaging and studying because that was the only way to open up the history and remove the Europeans' understanding of Africa, African history, and therefore the diaspora from those who were being colonized. The one way that people were trying to insert themselves in was bringing new education, actually talking about these histories, talking about African history, talking about what Blackness means outside of a white lens. So for right now in the present day, right, I think one of the biggest things is people really do need to engage in group study to understand what their attachments are, what the structures are, what their attachments are, as a way to figure out what the strategy will be for that location. This is another thing whiteness lies to us about. It says everything has to be uniform. And it's either a yes or no, black or white, a very strict binary, right? The humankind is not like that. We a whole hot ass mess. Human beings are some contradictory motherfuckers. Let's be real. That's the first thing in the the first thing in the field you learn as an anthropologist is you will be lied to. But people don't even know they're lying to you at the damn time, right? Because they're lying to themselves. We lie to ourselves all the time, right? Human nature is this kind of gobbledygook, right? As we try to figure out what living is. But then what does society tell us? It's not that. It's this or that, right? Everything is in this strictness. In order to break up your mind, you have to break your mind, right? So part of abolition is breaking your mind a bit so that you allow the unimaginable to come in, because the unimaginable is where you allow creativity to come in, and creativity is what allows you to dream and imagine and think of something else outside of the binary way we've been taught to live. So abolition really is also about breaking, but you will be breaking yourself a bit in order to figure out who you actually are versus the performance of the identities put upon you that society needs you to do. So to be an abolitionist versus an ally, you have to actually see yourself, right?
Are you seeing a rise in abolitionist work specifically, or you feel like everyone or the majority of people are sort of resting on allyship?
I think there's a big kind of gobbledygook of that as well, right? I think folks trying to figure out what to do. Like, what do I do right now in a society that is chaotic and is full of fear? So I have found there's a number of folks who are doing kind of abolitionist type work. There's decolonial work, right? There's all kinds of works that kind of come together. There's abolitionist work. You got folks in the decolonial. You got folks who do the anti-racist work. You got folks who do the anti-oppression work. I think they all play a role because we have to, and we also have the creatives. I don't want to forget them, the futurists, the ones who are the future thinkers, the futurists, the artists, the creators. All of us play a role in figuring out what seeds need to be planted now so that they can be fertilized as we go forward, right? Because it's also not just you can't fix 500 years of colonization and fucked up human interaction within a generation, right? We have to be able to understand that. So the work we're doing now is foundational and laying for future generations, but we have to then break ourselves of thinking of us as only individuals. We have to have it now and understand that we are connected in space and time. So I think this is why all those different types of work are important, especially the decolonial work and also the spiritual work, because for me, abolitionism has to also engage spirit. And that's where I think there is a new wave of folks coming in through that lens.
Kelly Palmer says we'll see the results of this labor, of this work that we're all doing in about 25 generations, which
Yeah.
is just so disheartening.
I think it'll be quicker though.
Yeah.
This is why I would have said yes maybe a couple of years ago. I think it's going to be quicker now because of folks connecting back to ancestral practices and ways. So I think that's the biggest shift, especially 2020, since 2020, right? When I don't think we really understand, we're not going to truly understand the impact for a few more years. We're still in a pandemic. But when people finally, not everyone, because we had folks who still had to be on the ground working, but there was still a slowdown. And that slowdown allowed folks to not just think, but to feel. And this is what's important. You got to feel. You have to actually, part of all that work I talked about, right, is about learning how to feel. Learning how to feel your body, learning how to feel your body and believing it so that you can actually find your humanity again. We've been so dehumanized. We've dehumanized ourselves, right? We've learned how to dehumanize ourselves, especially being in institutional spaces that tell you to keep going and producing. And anytime you feel something that goes against what you're told you should feel, we're also been trained, especially if you were a woman or appear as a woman in society, if you are Black or brown or indigenous, if you are queer, we are told that we have to stuff down our feelings because we don't want to show ourselves in a certain light. So then we start to not even believe ourselves till we're actually on the ground, knocked out or dead, right? Who want to die now? Shit, I want to live. So if I want to live, I might need to start believing how I feel, right? But if I believe how I feel, then I have to believe the space I'm in. If I believe that the space I'm in, that I might have to make another decision. And that decision is what is scary. Because if the decision means I need to leave or I need to do something different, but I have no capacity or understanding or template of what can come next, and I've never been taught that I can dream or think of something different, what do? You end up just many times want to stay, right? But with the pandemic and with people starting to feel and believe, and then realizing that all the things we were told, realizing that we could actually be paid and stay at home, and the state, and the government didn't go under, right? Like we ain't got to pay student loans and nothing, and the whole goddamn market didn't crash, right? Right. All the things we were told were fundamental to living completely blew up.
They were lies.
They were lies, right?
Because we're used to being lied to.
Exactly. So now,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. So the folks come back to their practices, right? That's opened up a whole new world, opened up a whole new understanding of healing, opened up a whole new understanding of what it means to be in community, right? What it means to actually, what actual prayer means, what actual veneration means, what actual relationship means outside of just yourself with land. So I would say I think it's actually going to be not as many generations, but I do believe that because of the re-engagement of old ways in the new, we are going to see a completely different understanding of what it means to be human coming forward.
Ooh.
Yeah. I also think that it's not as long as we think because of technology, because of apps like TikTok, where information is so readily available. I mean, just in the 3 years I've had TikTok, I literally have unlearned everything I learned in my whole entire institutionalized education in the United States. Like everything I learned from my teachers out the window. My master's degree out the window. I just learned everything now on TikTok. But as an anthropologist who studied humans over time, and we tend to romanticize the past.
Yes.
And there was a pre-colonial time, right before all of this started happening. Was there ever a time when humans like got along? And like, is that what you imagine a post-colonial paradigm being?
I think there are different ways of human organizing that sits outside the European political system that show us in the historical record that people were able to have contact without going through conquest. Right. And I think that's really important. I agree with the romanticizing. I don't want to ever romanticize the past because it's not saying that we all quote unquote necessarily got along, but there was an understanding that you can have differences, religious, social, economic, and not see that as a threat. And we see
Mm.
that in a lot of histories, right? A lot of Mesoamerican history. You can look at the Mayan city-states and how they conducted their relationship. They weren't under necessarily one rule, but they were able to, through the classic and pre-classic, and also bit of the post-classic period before conquest, be able to have the ability to trade between these states that each were able to be abundant and sustainable. Hell, even when you read some of the old journals and the old, one thing about a European, them motherfuckers wrote everything down, right? They wrote everything down. So we can read some shit from them, right? They would even remark when George Washington asked his troops to go and essentially decimate the Six Nations, the Iroquois Nation. When you read some of those soldiers or those colonialist renderings of what they saw before they burnt everything, they literally said they had never seen a society that was not only so well created and maintained, but so abundant, because the storehouses were full of food and there was still enough around nature, right? The long houses were massively built, but it was so communal. And you can actually see from the colonial perspective, the European perspective, that there was already systems in place that were much more harmonious and in relationship with other populations and the land. This is important. They were also in relationship with the land. So we do have examples that are now being reemerged. This is why when Lizzie died, the Queen died, a month ago or so, and right, and then we had folks, then we had folks coming out the woodwork saying, "Okay, great, now give us our shit back," right? Like, give us our. We've been, the folks were like, "Why now?" They have been asking for that shit, right? They had been asking for those histories. They had been, but they were subsumed under the colonial rhetoric. So when we remove that past and we have people being able to bring their histories to the light, we're going to start to see more and more. And especially with things like TikTok and stuff and other social medias, we're seeing the circulation of different histories that are giving us different templates, right? Now it's our job, though, to be able to understand what happened, how did it actually work, what didn't work, and what can we learn from that in the present day, because the present is still different from the past, but we can learn from it. What can we then do now to create these different systems? And you see it right now. Organizers and activists have been doing this for a long time. Queer, Black and brown queer communities have been doing this for a long time. Different economies, right? Different ideas of mutual aid, different understandings what family is. We've been removed from family because of the whole nuclear family idea, right? All of those systems, all of those ways of being are starting to be blown up, right? So I think in the blowing up, as we reassess what does human interaction mean, we do have historical understandings, but we can't just replicate them. We have to learn from them. And I think that's what people are trying to figure out. What do we learn from it? And how do we then reimagine it in the present, right?
From your understanding, just going back to your discussion around the harmonious indigenous communities, I think they're the Iroquois that before their communities were ravaged. Like when there's an opportunity to potentially integrate into such a, a beautiful and abundant society, why destroy? I don't know if you're comfortable even delving to answer that question, but why destroy over trying to become a part of it?
Well, think about, so this is where Europe done fucked up because they wrote everything down there too, right? We have their whole history. What is the history of Europe, right? History of Europe is violence, right? I argue a lot that all the European did was extrapolate its violence. Instead of doing it internally, it exported it, right? So let's take the Iroquois. So even though Washington, this is after the Revolutionary War, we had supposedly won, but they were still the British, right? There's still a British connection. Brits don't know how to interact with people without taking over. The first people they colonized were the Welsh and the Irish and then the Scots, right? When I say decimate, not just in taking over land, took away their language, took away the religion, took away the spiritual practice, and then rendered those practices as primitive. It was basically the 1.0 before they went external, right? So when you see another population, say like a native population who you've already deemed in your mind as inferior because it does not have the same customs as you, the same religion as you, and the same ways of being, even if it's showing that they're better than you, because they essentially were, right? Let's be real, because they were chilling and y'all trying to figure out what the hell to do, right? But if all you know is violence and all you know is consumption because you were told by your God, right, the Christian white God, that life is made through a hierarchical ordering and you were the embodiment on earth of that order, you gonna win. You say, well, this might be good, but I can still do it better because you've lied to yourself. You think of all, so all you see, so instead of you seeing abundance in terms of a relationship through a colonizer lens, right, through an imperialist lens, you see consumption, therefore you see profit. Because what Washington was seeing there, 20 years before that happened, he was in a militia for Virginia and he was land speculating. They had already divvied up that land for future prospects and future money before they even had it. Because in the imperialist mind, the economy is a capitalist one. So you don't see harmony, you see profit. Because your whole lens is through a violent one that only knows consumption and taking and moving lines based upon some ideology that you got from some higher being. And the British did this differently because Henry VIII removed himself from the church. So unlike the Spanish and the Portuguese that were still beholden to that Catholic Church in Rome, Britain was its own damn master because it had told itself it was its master, because Henry done said that he didn't have to need no damn pope. He was the embodiment of God, right? So the monarch and the parliament have always had this relationship. And this is why in the present day, again, when Lizzie croaked and people were saying, well, the monarch has no power, it's just the parliament. They've always been in a relationship because both of them have the vested interest in maintaining themselves via the commodification of its former colonies, right? So so all you know is violence, you're just going to reproduce violence.
That is the most dangerous thing, though, isn't that? To make yourself, I mean, to an extent, right? To make yourself God. I mean, in a way, because there's no checks and balances. Now we are, I don't want to get too into this, but I do believe we are the embodiments of God, and whatever that means to you. But imagine if you are so traumatized that and disconnected that when you try and tap into that, it just spews.
I want to get into this, Brittany. This is important. What you just said is completely important, right? In so many things, because you're absolutely right. We have to go there, though. That's what people don't want to do. We have to go there because generational trauma is not with Black and brown and other BIPOC folks. Generational trauma is with whiteness and white folks. They are carrying generational trauma that is so damn deep, they don't understand what they're replicating. We're trying to figure out how to heal. They're trying to figure out that they actually have trauma. Because when you have made yourself the creator, therefore made yourself God, and therefore then redefined humanity in that image, that is dangerous. Right? Sylvia Wynter writes about this beautifully. She's a Jamaican theorist who talks about the construction of biological man two through the European imagination. So essentially what she's saying, and it's a beautiful, it's a manifesto, it's long and it's complex, but it's beautifully in that she's explaining how when the European came, there was two waves of redefining the human, right? The first one was through the Christian white lens God, that they used religion in order to justify this kind of hierarchy, saying that Black folks Africans who then became Black could be the embodiment of labor because Bartholomew de la Casa made the argument in front of the church, right, in front of the Spain, the church, that indigenous folks needed to be assimilated, not used as labor. That was the first wave. Then you start to see science come in, and that gave them a better justification. We can make it biological. So now we know biologically, via basically different ideas of how humans look, right? This is phrenology. This is my master's thesis, looking at the non-metric analysis, right? That they use to literally rank and order humans, coming out of Linnaeus, Blumenbach, and all of these so-called intellectual academics, right? We need to question what the hell intellectual means. But this creates, right? This created a whole order. They made themselves creator, right? So when you are the creator and you make, and what does Christian white God say? He says that he made humans in his image. So that's all they did was transfer it, but that is dangerous. And we also know it's not true. Right. And I think this is why the ancestral practice is coming back and people deconstructing from the church, right? And all types of churches that are really going through, especially millennials and younger, people really thinking about what does ancestors mean? People going into the history, like you saying, and teaching it in the public and saying, no, this is all wrong, right? Even the Columbus thing, right? People like, we can't use modern ideas to look at past wrongs. They didn't like his ass then either. Shit.
Yeah.
Isabella brought the people who served the Spanish Inquisition was like, you out of pocket, dude. You and your brother got to come back home, right?
But you also can use modern ideas.
What'd you say?
But you also can use modern ideas.
Yes, you can, right? But if you don't know your past, how can you see your present? Right? And I think that's the other issue too, right? It's like, because we think that somehow that shit was normalized then. You know what I mean? If we think in some time in history we were normal and okay with humans being violent, then we can sit there and say, well, it's biological. It's somehow natural. It's okay. This shit was never okay, right? This shit was so we have to be. So I agree with you, Brittany. We can use modern standards, but modern standards only are modern because they come from historical standards that also said that shit wasn't okay. Right? We are our ancestors. But this is what whiteness isn't like, because when you start making sense, it disrupts its nonsense, but the nonsense has been told to us as actual sense. Right? So we're told that human beings are naturally violent. Who told you that? We're told human beings are naturally hierarchical. Who told you that? We're told that men, because they're bigger, are somehow stronger. Who the fuck told you that? I'm 6'3". I was able to lift more than some of the basketball players playing college volleyball, right? So
but if that's the case, shouldn't men be in the fields working and the rest of us should be making decisions?
I mean, that ain't a bad idea. I mean, well, the thing is, it's not a bad idea when we understand that society is based upon right now a over hyper understanding of masculinity, therefore masculine energy. But what is masculine energy? Like you said, it's more quick, but it's not receptive. So yeah, it would make more sense, because we got to pull that shit back. We're in an overproductive drive right now. The land's crying. Resources are not necessarily scarce, but they're made to be scarce because we keep pillaging without replenishing. And then we're doing it to people as well, right? What happens if we just stop working? If we just stop doing? What if the solution was just to stop? We had a sampling of this, right? Again, the pandemic gave us a sample of what happens if we just stop and just receive, just create, just be, right? But again, that's scary because it disrupts power. And if you bought into power and you've bought into a power structure that says if you just get to the top, you can have all of this. This explains why we have this surge of this broadcast, the podcast bros coming out right now, right?
Oh God, I'm so sick of them.
Right? The reinscribing of misogyny, right? This shit is ridiculous right now. It is like 1950s in 2020s, but make it even worse. Right? Like it is some deep shit. But this is what I tell people. When you're at the break of trying to break a system, it will bring back old shit and make it new again. Right? But it's going to use different bodies now. So instead of just having white men talking about all this shit, now we got Black and brown men doing the same and doubling down, right? Doubling down on it and then spitting it back out to us. And then we're supposed to just sit here and be like, for the culture. No, it's not for the culture. It's for the maintenance of the status quo. And the minute they actually, if they want to maintain, this is why I kill people. It kills me. The whole Kanye thing kills me, and Killer Mike kills me, and it kills me because it's like you are doing the bidding of the oppressor, who the minute they become fully in power will then use your Black ass just as it always has done. You will not have a seat at that table. The table,
how much money you have.
Yeah, the table's not for nobody. The table ain't even for them. They don't even, the thing is, they can't even trust each other. Those in power don't even trust each other. Look what's going on with Trump right now. right? We see the examples, but do we have the analysis to understand the examples we're being told? And I think that's what abolitionist work is for me. How I do it is, can I provide different analysis that makes sense and are digestible in the public? So that when people are feeling these things or they're seeing it, they're like, oh, wait a minute, okay, I'm understanding this a bit more now. So I think those who educate this way, and again, this is a long history of the Black radical tradition. It's like, how do we get on the ground with people so that we're not sitting in the ivory tower too? Because you can be Black and brown, but if all you are is a bourgeoisie in that in those institutions, you are doing the work as well of the oppressor while you think while you think you're pushing back against it, right?
Well, it goes to, like you said, redefining our understanding of power. If our
Yes,
understanding of power is based on this white male patriarchal nonsense, then of course we'll just try and get to that, and then we feed the cycle.
exactly. And power is so much different than that. That's only one form of power, just like there's only one form of the human that we've been taught too, right? Because power, we have power too. The minute we put our labor down, the minute the system crashes. But do we have the ability to put our labor down, right? And in the US, we have been so fed this idea that somehow we're free. We've been fed this idea, this is freedom, this is democracy, this is what you need, right? And if you go to another country, you don't have the grand space and the big houses and all of this stuff, right? That's freedom. When you think that's what it is, you have to understand that's only one form of power, but there's power in other ways. There's power in community, there's power in mutual aid, there's power in, quite frankly, sitting in a more matriarchal understanding of life, right? Those are different forms of power, but they're not oppressive. And they're not top down and they're not force. But all we know is those three things, right? And I think this is where I get nervous, or this is where I believe we really have to push back against the encroaching misogyny, because that's what it's trying to do. The introduction of misogyny back again, like that's how it's coming out now, is a way to keep that force in play as an understanding of what true power is.
Yeah. And also, whoever gets to tell the story has the power. And
Yes.
I find that our lens of this world is so impacted by our music and our film. And even there's a Netflix show, The Last Kingdom. I don't know if you've watched that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Basically,
Mhm.
like how like the Vikings and the Norse were like fighting each other and colonizing each other, and then and if you know history, then they colonized the UK, and then the UK, like it's just colonization over colonization. And it's like, if you've only seen and witnessed, even Greek mythology is like fucked up violence, right? If that's all you know and that's all you see, then we have a culture that is more prone to violence, and like the only option is I'm going to go to your home and take your stuff, you know?
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think also it like having more voices in media, and like having people of marginalized communities, but really the global majority, tell our stories, that's also how we take back our power.
I completely agree. And I think this is why the arts and creativity is so important, because that's how we do it,
Yes.
right? That's exactly how we do, but it's also the reason why the state will, the first thing they cut and defund are arts and humanities, right? But you understand where power really lies by seeing what a state is afraid of. And you can see what a state's afraid of by what it defunds and what it cuts and what it will always demonize, right? So it's always demonized from the beginning. Anything that has, honestly, with leisure, anything that allows us to sit and be with one another, to have space and time just to dream. And I think this is why the reintroduction to spirituality again, right? Because Laura, you're absolutely right that the mythology we're fed, the systems that we've also been fed are still violent ones. But if you look at other locations and you look at other cosmologies of how, and again, cosmology being how we understand and order life, if we see different pantheons, we see different understandings of what it means to be living, right? So as somebody who engages in Orisha veneration, and you listen to some of the Orisha stories, right? them folks were crazy. I mean, I love Orisha, but damn, his Sean go off and he will light a whole damn fire on a village on fire just because on accident because he didn't realize he was mad, right? He's like, my bad. I know the primordial fire, but you'll piss me, right? Right? But but there's always, and this is what I appreciate, and if you look at any a lot of various different African cosmologies, traditional African cosmologies, there's a way that there's an understanding that is a community-based practice that is about an exchange of energy, and there's always a consequence to actions. So it's teaching us about responsibility and reciprocity, right? I did a video about the crossroads for Hoodoo Heritage Month because they're all interconnected as an ATR, but there's a way that what Christianity feeds us is this, right? Christianity feeds us that all you have to do is pray it away and give your things to Jesus, right? And he'll take it away and you're absolved and saved. You ain't got to do shit else, right? You can go to church on a Sunday in your fancy dress. If you're Catholic, just go to jeans. But you go to church, right? And you do your praying and you go home. And that's it. So there's a way that you're giving and we're also told that in the Christian church, right, and especially the Catholic church, when you take that Eucharist, you give your body up. Your offering is you. You are offering yourself up to a primordial that refuses to actually do anything back, but all it asks is to continuously take. What does that sound like, right? Yeah. But then you move over to different cosmologies, right? So let's take Shango for the example again. Love you, Shango, right? But he's got a lot of emotions. You come to the crossroads and you're asking for, say, something like, okay, I need a road open for leadership. Say I want to, and Shango is the one, and you go to the crossroads, you give it to Elagua Eshu. There's a responsibility though. Not only are you giving an offering, you got to do some shit, right? You got to do something. Because Elagua can't do shit for you. He can give that offering to Shango, but what Shango gonna do for you? Maybe you got to do something, right? And if you do something, but you're doing it in using my energy, and you're trying to give me something to do something that is ill will that you have no business doing, because there's a consequence for that too, you will have your ass handed to you as well, right? So there's consequences to your actions, because that is how you learn what living is. And if you look at those Pantheon stories, that's what they're teaching us lessons. Shango learned real quick. Maybe if I get angry, I don't want to light a whole village on fire because these are also my people, right? So he learned about emotions. But this is also important. If you listen to and read some of these and really listen to elders when they speak these traditions and these stories, they're also showing us that primordials had big emotions because that was how they were figuring out how to be human. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're also showing us humanity, and the fact that humanity is a duality, not a strict binary, but duality. So there's light and there's dark, and we're always going to need to go between those two to understand how to move ourselves forward for our best and highest good, not just individually, but collectively, right? That is a huge difference compared to what we are fed through Christianity, right? So those who are also deconstructing, this is going to be an interesting time as well. It's also a very tumultuous time because when you go from a practice that teaches you to give it up, right? And you don't have to do much, and you're going into these other practices that are actually a practice, not just a prayer, but a practice, right? And you realize it's not just a once a week thing or a twice a year thing, but it's an actual ongoing practice. There's a way that this can be, and I did a video about this too, in that slippage, there's a way that the charismatic leaders can come in and the cults can come in these times too to bring folks into these other ideologies. Mm-hmm. So there's a way that we have to be careful and understand that when we're coming into these practices, they are community-based, and we have to be able to be in community with other people. But if we have had problems with that, we then got to step back and realize, okay, what do I need to look at myself first? Because maybe I'm not going to jump into another practice. Maybe my practice is figuring out self, right? Being able to come back to self, being able to hear self, and then I can figure out where my community is, laying the groundwork for my family, for maybe the next generation does more practice, right? So we're laying the groundwork to break apart the hold that a Christian white God held on all of us, that told us that we can only be a certain thing if we act a certain way. Whereas practices are telling us, no, you can be a full human being, but there are things you have to actually engage and do. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yes.
Yes, but it gives me a somewhat connected follow-up question, which is you mentioned the cycles that we exist in, and that you can that when you look at things from the anthropological perspective, you can see the cycles. Can you see where in a cycle we are right now? And is it a cycle that is expanding forward to a more positive, happy future? Or are we just repeating some of the same nonsense that we can't seem to get out of?
I think we're actually at a crossroads. It's not determined yet.
Mm,
I really do. I think we are at a literal crossroads, right? As a society overall. And there are multiple roads one can take, but multiple roads one can take in both directions, right? So say
mhm,
we're going, I'm going to use, I hate these terms, but I'm going to use progress versus regressive, right?
mhm,
So if we're going in a progressive way, that can be multiple roads for that to get there, right? Whereas the same way over here, I think we're at this crossroad right now as people are trying to discern what is actual truth,
yeah.
right? This is why things like social media is so important, but there's a way that where it feels like a battle sometimes of wills and ideologies, because again, when you to believe, y'all think about it, to believe the reality you're in, you've got to break everything you all ever thought was actually truth,
Hmm.
Yes.
right? That shit's hard.
Hmm.
And I think we have to realize that too. That's really hard. There's a way that once you have done that kind of beginning of it's a constant thing through your whole life. The this I struggle with this. I will say this sometimes. I struggle with this. The empathy and care you have to give others who are just trying to figure it out has to be a lot. It really does, right? Like you have to have a boundary now. Like you call me out my name, I'm gonna cuss you out and block you. But before we get there, right? If there's a way that you got to realize, like if you've been told something your whole life and then something else comes in, even if it sounds good or it feels, it's going to take a minute to register. It's going to take a minute to sit in. It's going to take a minute to settle, right? And I think that's why the crossroad can be so chaotic. It's meant to be chaotic, but it can feel even more chaotic. And this is where community comes in. But again, it's a location where we have to figure out, what does community mean? Who are the people that can be with me so that we can actually grow? And what does that actually look like? Right. And I think this is where leaders and those who are not just intellectuals, but it's the creatives. I really believe this is a time of the creatives to be able to create in the public and give different understandings or ideas or images of what is possible. Futurism is actually, I think, one of the most important, not just, it's not a discipline, it's a praxis that we're going to be in right now. What does a future look like, right? That is not built upon the same kind of present and past. And I think that's where the crossroads can feel dangerous or feel much more chaotic because we don't know yet.
Mhm. And people are so afraid of the unknown.
Yes.
Something that, like, I feel like where our content intersects is like um, social justice activism and spirituality, and how both of them are necessary in doing this work. And a lot of the content that I watch you make, I'm like, see, somebody else gets it. Like, I think just generally, especially in American culture, that people are really afraid of like the dark feminine, like the
Yeah.
unknown and the chaos and the
Yes.
rage and like the not so comfortable feelings. I mean, I have a anthropological theory about that if you want me to tell it to you a little later on, but it's just this general uncomfortness with dark matter in
Yes.
general that I think like um, is why people would rather hold on to something that they know, even though it's, like oppressive, toxic. That's literally colonization is killing us.
Yes.
Rather than let that go and be a little uncomfortable so that we can all like co-create together. Um, so like how much of, you talk a lot about spirituality actually on your page, and how much of that is important for the work that you do.
It's foundational. It's so funny you asked me this. Last night I was jotting down a bunch of ideas about abolitionist root work, right? And because it's foundational for us to be able to understand what it means to be in community with one another, right? And the spiritual aspects, spiritual principles, spiritual laws are vital. I think we should be teaching those honest to God in K through 12, because the law of reciprocity is a very hard one, but also a very easy one. You give to receive, you receive to give. But if you're in a society that tells you to take, the idea of receiving and giving is so out of your mind that when you are introduced to it, you don't know what to do with it. You don't trust it, right? And so I think spirituality is vitally important. I actually believe the arts like astrology are really important right now, because to understand energy and how planets move and how we interact with them will not only give people a better sense of self, right? When you get a good astrologer, whether it be tropical or sidereal, you get a good astrologer who can sit down with you and pull apart your natal chart and be able to help you understand the ideas that you have, the conscious, subconscious. All of a sudden you can see yourself differently, right? All of a sudden there's another language you can use, right? And I think spirituality gives us a different language and a different lens to understand living in life. And because of that, it gives us different understanding of what it means to be human, right? And this is where the ancestors come in. And I think this is vitally important. As we come back to ourselves, we realize that we are who we came from. So the dark feminine, right? So think about the dark feminine. We literally come from mothers, right? Or from people who give birth, I should say. So the womb, right? Those who have wombs. And that is creation. But what do we demonize in society? Those who can give birth and have wombs, right? So those who give life are the ones who are then essentially told that we ain't shit in the society. Right? So when we've been taught to fear, not just create, that kind of creation, we're also taught to fear darkness. We're taught to fear the idea of Black, therefore Black people. Anti-Blackness really does permeate our understanding of anything that we cannot see, right? So anti-Blackness then gets us as an underlying understanding of what is. When we start thinking about things like chaos and things we can't see, we're already told from birth to fear that, just like you would fear a Black body, right? So there's a way that spirituality, again, lets us know that's all bullshit. It really does. It really does. It really does. And this is when I truly understood the power of spirit and spirituality. I remember sitting with a couple of Babas I was going to do some work with. I learned under a Baba for a year just to understand the Orisha worship and things like that from the Isheshe tradition, so out of Nigeria, even though I practice more Cuban-based understandings of it. And I remember them talking about Obatala. Obatala is the Orisha of the white cloth, the Orisha, right, who has molded humans' heads out of clay. The Orisha who is known to be cool and calm and collected, right? Well, they told me about a story in the 1960s. It happened in an Ile being a house, an Orisha worship house, but it has a godparent in it, where there's a bad habit of when the tradition came into the U.S., but also when it was still back in its homeland of Cuba, that a lot of the santeros and santeras would not crown meaning make priests of any Orisha or of Ifa if that person was Black. Right? So our tradition, Black tradition, did not allow Black folks to be crowned. Well, in a house and in the Ile, they were throwing the Akin, and Obatala came down. Again, the Orisha that is known to be cold, calm, and collected. Obatala came down and said, if you don't start crowning my children in this fucking tradition that is a Black in origin, I will take all y'all's heads. Right? And in that, after that, they crowned their first Black person in Ucha, right? And that moment, when I heard that story, it let me know a couple of things. One, spirit ain't for that shit, right? Spirit's not for this. What you're not going to do is sit here and use my name, but not allow my children to be the ones leading in these practices, right? So that let me number two, spirit is again not for those shits. So when we're bringing spirit into the conversation, spirit's always been an activist. Spirit's always been an organizer, because spirit is like, again, what you're not going to do is demonize my whole practice, but then use my energy to get your ass going forward while you are then on using the backs of my children to finance this stuff. This is another form of enslavement, right? It's another form of taking that, again, the law of reciprocity. You cannot take until you give, right? So I think that spirit and ideas of spirituality are so vital to any kind of work we go forward, because it allows us to understand what true relationship is. And it allows us to understand what true consequences are, so that when we're in relationship with folks and we have to actually do things like have a conflict, have a conversation that's uncomfortable, we understand that that does not mean it has to end our relationship, but it's actually part of the cycle, because we are in community, and community is about being able to work through these things, not just keep reproducing the same old systems, right? So that's how I see it. It's vitally important, and it's embedded in all these practices. And the ancestors are fed and hungry. Let's be real. The ancestors have been fed, and they are hungry for, honestly, they are hungry for justice, right? You can't think about it, y'all. You can't steal people. You can't commit genocide. You can't try to erase people. You can't take them from their land, but then want to feed back to them their practices, right? And then expect somehow you're going to be okay. And that the ancestors who created these practices to begin with, and you need the ancestors to activate the damn practice, what do you think is going to happen? Right? And I think the ancestors, because people are coming back to them, they are being fed, they are being called, they're being venerated, and they are being engaged. They're now ready to go to essentially spiritual war, because we've always been in a spiritual war. Now both sides have battlegrounds instead of just one.
We had Anita Kopach on twice now. She's the author of Shallow Waters. She wrote about Yemeya, who was an Orisha. And she actually just mentioned that, she was a Black mermaid. And the path of the transatlantic slave trade was the exact path of the hurricane. And that, her opinion, that was like the karmic retribution of taking her children from the land, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that one. That now I will say that sometimes gets heavily pushed back against, but I actually do also subscribe a bit to that as well, because there is a way that again, there is a way that is still energy, and there are still bodies on the ocean floor. Yes. Right? And we have to remember, Orisha came on the heads of their children. So when you are crowned, you are literally, there are things done where the Orisha sit on your crown, in your head, right? That's what they call your Ori. When you crown, you literally put somebody else on it. When Orisha came over on that boat, right? It's a disorienting thing too. It's like, you got me fucked up. What is going on right now, right? And so I think that story, and thinking about Yemeya, thinking about the whole mermaid thing, that whole Ariel thing, Lord have mercy. People want to do so bad. I swear to God, oppression.
Lost their minds. They lost their minds over it.
Lost their minds. Lost their minds, right? Like, Lord, you would have thought they asked Angela Bassett to play Lizzie or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, Lord have mercy. Like, it was just, I couldn't even engage. I'm like, this is ridiculous at this point. Like, y'all really want outrage, right? This is, but in the outrage, they're also proving the point that race matters. This is what always cracks me up about folks who talk about race don't matter. If race don't matter so much, when you put a Black woman who actually won the role because she could sing, and it was a damn fake ass character, I don't care what mythology it came from, it's a made up character that only had to have red hair, and Sebastian is Caribbean with the damn Jamaican accent. Right? Like, none of this makes sense. So now you're like, my culture, if your culture is based upon a made up ass mermaid who had to go, baby, that's a whole nother, right? But you proved the point. You proved the point that you see race so much that you see it, you can't even see the story, you only see the body, right? So who was the racist? Right? but it, but for him and yeah, I go. Sorry, I go on tangents. But for him and yeah, right, coming back to it and thinking about what it means. This is why the importance. I'm going to bring back land again. Land and nature is so important because mostly what Orisha are different embodiments of nature. They're different embodiments of the one creator, right? Because it is not a polytheistic religion. It is one creator, Udumare, who has different embodiments that come down on earth that we call Orisha.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if the creator is coming down and sitting in different aspects of the creator on somebody's head, and you have bastardized creation, you have made yourself the creator now, what do you think the land's going to do? What do you think the nature's going to do over time, right? Once it can get its footing. And it always has been here, right? Humans crack me up. And when I say humans, I mean capitalists crack me up because they keep thinking that somehow they can tame and control the land, right? We're going to tame and control this. Every time you try to tame and control, what happens? The land responds back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you want to go ahead and you want to make all these properties on the beaches around the US, right? And parts of the Caribbean, right? And Puerto Rico, expansion mansions that people have no access to. Fine, great. I'll just take your damn property. Right?
Mm-hmm.
All those $1 million properties, even in the lakes, you go to Lake Michigan around here in Chicago, right? And around and the whole land, the beach and frontier is completely being removed. The water is encroaching.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So as the water encroaches on one spot, then what else do you have? Here the water's coming in, other parts of the world, the water's drying up, right? So we're seeing what happens when you sit out of balance. The land will always respond back, but we don't know how to listen to the land when you only understand it as being a place of consumption that you can put a dollar sign on for you to be able to actually have a personal benefit from, right? That's the arrogance and ignorance of whiteness.
Yes. Yes. Oh, you just like that was so like that was fire.
I'm glad it makes sense.
Do you want to ask the last question?
No. I guess I'll ask, what work do you think that Black bodied people have to do, or BIPOC in general, and what work do you think that white people need to do?
I think that BIPOC folks, I would say so BIPOC folks, I think we have to continue to heal. And I really do mean that. There's a way that coming back to our practices, coming back to our ancestral ways, and being able to take hard looks at how we have reproduced oppressive systems internally within ourselves and our communities is a way for us to be able to figure out what it means to move forward. Because we have had plenty of historical understandings, plenty of theorists who talk about the fact that if you do not root out the oppressor in you, you will become the oppressor, right? But only those who have been oppressed can fully see the oppressor and the oppressed themselves, because you can only know who you are based upon who you are not. But if you are the oppressor, you can't even see yourself because you're only seeing the oppressed, right? So there's an undue burden on the body of the oppressed. But once we just understand that this shit ain't fair, life ain't fair, this ain't fair, this is what reality is. There's an undue burden on the oppressed. But that undue burden does not mean you got to help that oppressor. It means that you got to be able to come back to sense of self. So there's a different template. Because when the oppressor doesn't have somebody to come on to and push down upon, then they will start doing it to themselves. So then thinking about those who occupy the space of whiteness, right, of white, the embodiment of white. Like I said before, you got to deal with the generational trauma, right? You have to understand that you are living in trauma. You got to understand that this shit is not normal. It is not, and it is not right. And I think we are seeing that a bit. You do see a lot of these Gen Zs who are pushing back against their families, right? And they get disowned. I mean, there's some hateful shit that happens. Like, I don't understand how you can just throw your kid out at 18 years old, but we see this over and over again, right? But again, when you only understand consumption and only understand children as bodies and labor, once they're used to have their use met and not met, you move them out the way. You can see it replicating in family structures, right? So I think white folks have got to delve into their generational trauma you have got to ask yourself, why are you looking to indigenous practice to find your enlightenment when your ancestors are the ones that demonized that practice to begin with? And what the hell do you think you're going to do with it when these practices require permission from the ancestors? Make it make sense. So instead of asking, can I do this practice? Ask yourself, once you have the understanding what the practice is, do you have any ability to be in it? Right?
The
Like,
answer is no. That's
right.
why.
See what I'm saying, right? That, right? That's why I hate the question, like when I do my hoodoo posts, right? Because it's African American Hoodoo Heritage Month, and someone will say something like, well, can white folks, can I practice? I'm not gonna, you're gonna do what you're gonna do. Let's be real. I am 41 years old. I learned this real quick. You're gonna do what the hell you're gonna do. But I have just told you that this is an ancestral-based practice that was constructed and created out of a plantation-based economy to make sure that Black folks were able to connect with land. And if you are Susan, who's got Irish ancestry, and you think that you can still practice, baby, go ahead and do it. I don't know what to tell you, but it ain't gonna be African American hoodoo.
Susan's like, this is it. This is the one that I need. This is the one that's going to fix everything. This is it.
Yes, right? And oh, Brittany, is exactly what it is, right?
This is the one.
This is the one, because we are fed that all you have to do is go on a weekend retreat,
10 minutes a day.
10 minutes a day, cry a little bit, right? Cry some shit, that's your shadow work, right? And then look at here, we love and light, right? There's no interrogation, right? And so I think this is, but again, you people wanting to do that, especially white women, you got to look at yourselves, y'all. When you want to do that route, why are you doing that route? Because what are you missing? What are you actually missing? What are you trying to fill? And if it's a void because you feel like you're not connected to anything, that's the first place you actually got to delve into to understand where was the connection then lost. And that's a whole, and don't tell me you Salem. Y'all motherfucking ancestors were not burned at the goddamn stake in Salem. Let's be
A
fucking
lot of people
real.
coming through Salem these days.
Lord have mercy, right? Like everybody in their mama was in Salem. No, you weren't. You were not burned, right? Come on
At
now.
all.
At all.
At all.
Right? Come
Your
on.
ancestors were in the house.
Thank you. Telling on that,
fanning away the vapors, and
right.
while the enslaved people were in the field.
Thank you.
No.
Right. Like
no.
So can we pull out the lies, right? Can we pull out the myth they've been telling themselves to allow them to skirt the responsibility of the weight of what happened in the past, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's white folks going to do generational trauma work. And all that together, right, while they're doing that work, and there's also got to be a way in which then we have to start to reimagine what community is. Now, I love Beyonce's last album, Renaissance. That shit still got me in a chokehold, right? But at the same time, we also have to remember a lot of these artists are heavy deep into capitalism, or capitalists too, right? And they use revolutionary language because right now it's marketable. But even the marketability, you still learn something, right? And I think that there's a way we have to start to realize when we hear in media and records like, I don't need nobody, right? I can do it all by myself. It's like, no, that's not really true, because human beings, if we've learned anything through any discipline, human beings are communal people. You need somebody else in order to survive, right? But we have to understand that there's more to life than just surviving. So if we want to think about what is living and thriving mean, even in a fucked up space that we're in right now, we have to be able then, as we're doing our individual healing and trauma work, start to be able to put it into practice. And you can only put it into practice when you're with other people, right? And I think that's the one thing I will push back heavily on a lot of some of these new age spiritualists, and even honestly, some of the spiritual priests, like people who are actually priests in these different traditions too. They'll get on here and basically say, once you're healed, right, you got to be healed first, then you're going to go out, and if somebody pushes you, no, you don't know you're healed until you actually enact it in practice with somebody else, right? You can't do anything unless you're with somebody else. And so we have to not be afraid to be with other people as we're also learning more about who we are, because that will help us figure out what does it mean to actually live with others when it's not perfect. Because nothing is perfect, right? But we're kind of fed this idea that if it's not perfect, then we have to move away from it.
We sure are.
Right? And that's not true. That's not true, And that's why these whole, like, very random side note, but this is why TikTok be cracking me up because I learned a lot about all kinds of shit, like girls trips right to Miami are not a good idea. Because, and it's a good example though, right? because there's a way that like the performance of life has to be interrogated, because we trying to perform life. So we're trying to perform friendship and we're trying to perform what it means to have fun and live. But then when we try to perform together with people we don't even actually really know, and we go somewhere else, that's the praxis of it, shit blows up because we've never you start to realize I don't even think I know you, let alone like you, because we have different ideas of everything, what a vacation is, what it means to have money, but you don't ever ask those questions ahead of time because they're busy about the performing friendship, performing circles, performing life, right? So as we do that kind of healing and trauma work, and we come together, we have to realize that coming together is going to break performance. That's what also makes people uncomfortable, because it's like, well, then maybe I have to actually be an individual, because we're not individuals in society either. We perform individuality, but everyone wants to conform, right? If you're actually an individual, then you're demonized when we're told to be individual. No, we're not. We're all part of these kind of pre-made performative identities and roles. So what does it mean to come together in our authentic selves as we've done this work to be in community, so we can actually see what a bunch of authentic selves and community actually looks like? Right? And it's not going to be kumbaya, and it shouldn't be, because humans, I love humanity, but humans are fucking annoying as hell, right? Let's be real. Right?
Our contradictions, how you said before, our contradictions,
right? Contradictions, and we still need each other, right? So it can all be true at the same time.
We were just saying that.
Yeah. I love that, like in the beginning of our conversation, you said, wow, we're such messy, like we're such a messy species, yet it's so fun, you know? Like this has been a very nourishing conversation, but you've made me laugh more than I think I've laughed in the last week. And like, you know, we've been messaging each other through TikTok. And thank you for looking at my DMs. I like messaged you like months ago. I was like, come on our podcast.
Oh, really? Oh, I never got it. That's the one thing I wish TikTok would open up a bit, because I don't sometimes, because IG does it, right? I'll get random shit on IG.
TikTok, you have to follow each other. But we've been talking about this eclipse and how it's such a catalyst for change. So I hope you're moving through this time with ease.
It's been an interesting, it's been
it's pure chaos over here. It's great. just giving in per your suggestion, just giving into the chaos. I've met chaos with chaos. So we are where we are.
That's what I had to do. since this time last year when the nodes changed, it's been crazy.
Yes. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your wisdom and making us laugh. And where can people learn more about you? Obviously, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, so of course my TikTok, you can see me there, but also I have a Patreon, Knowledge Without Borders, and where I do a BIPOC book club. It's essentially an abolitionist read of BIPOC authors that will give us different ideas of what it means to live and be human outside of oppressive systems. So if folks want to learn with me, you can join at any time. Essentially, I break the books up into 4 weeks, and every week you have a video from me with a set of with a question for reflection that makes the literature you're reading more relevant for the present day. And so you can come in any time and start anywhere you want for that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So, and then finally, I will be doing some content on YouTube. I'm still figuring that out as well. But you can check out my website, drnicoletruesdell.com. I'm always open to come and give talks and lectures around the country and world. So people want to just reach out to see how we can work together. I'm always open for that as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.